If you're one of the more than 250 million Americans who already have health insurance, you will keep your health insurance.
For up to 20 million Americans, they will lose the insurance they currently have, the insurance that they like and they want to keep.
Insurance companies can no longer impose lifetime limits on the amount of care you receive. They can no longer discriminate against children with pre-existing conditions. They can no longer drop your coverage if you get sick. They can no longer jack up your premiums without reason.
Obamacare raises taxes on the American people by approximately $500 billion.
They are required to provide free preventive care like checkups and mammograms, a provision that's already helped 54 million Americans with private insurance.
Obamacare cuts Medicare by approximately $500 billion.
All right, so obviously two different perspectives from two different candidates, those competing sound bites, of course, from President Obama and Mitt Romney earlier today. Now, the wake of the court's ruling upholding health care reform, including the individual mandate, has got both parties in major spin control here. And the decision, I don't think anyone's going to debate, will have a huge impact on the upcoming election. But the question is, how? Now, the answer will certainly depend on how each side is going to make today's ruling either galvanize their base here, point out their distinctions, etc. As you saw from Mitt Romney's response, the Republicans already going on offense. And joining us now to break down political implications of today's landmark decision, Jessica Proud, good friend to the show, Republican strategist and vice president at NLO Strategies, and Dominic Carter, a political journalist, author, and so much more. Okay. Now, I read today, right after that response, a comment. This came from Terry Holt, you know, a veteran Republican campaign advisor. He said, Obama might have his law, but the GOP has a cause. This promises to galvanize Republican support around a repeal of what could be the largest tax increase in American history. Really, is this a good day for the GOP, you think? Or privately, weren't they rooting for a repeal?
Look, today the president is able to claim victory, but it's going to be very temporary. I think the long-term messaging in this is that and the most significant piece of that is that it is a tax increase, and the courts handed the Republicans that talking point. So all of a sudden, you know, you have a very different dynamic. If they had ruled it down, I think it would have been much harder to make the argument against it. It's going to rally the base.
Even with Mitt Romney and his Massachusetts baggage.
Absolutely, because people feel so strongly about it. I don't think he came out strong today. He said day one, priority number one is to repeal the law. And the president does have the authority to allow states to opt out of it. So that's a very significant piece of this.
Well, I'm not sure I bought necessarily what he said, but I think he delivered it pretty good today. I'll give him that. Dominic, you're in the White House earlier today, and apparently the president was watching a couple channels that both got it wrong as it related to the mandate, but then finally when they got the information to him right, he apparently did a little fist bump or something. But he didn't spike the football today publicly. My question is this the best that the White House could have hoped for today?
This is what happened today is a game changer. All right, D-Day for President Obama. Had he lost today's decision, it might have very well cost him the election. In other words, today's decision ends a month of June that was not a good one for him, especially with his attorney general, and now it has completely flipped. It's a good day, from my perspective, for the American people, those that don't have health insurance. But I'm starting to wonder, and at least Jessica, I give her a lot of credit, because at least she gave Obama credit for today. She said it's only credit for today. But I'm starting to wonder if Republicans in leadership are delusional.
Well,
the spin that they're putting out there.
That's a perfect segue to a conversation Andrew had earlier today, because you spoke to the Republican National Committee after the ruling from their perspective.
Well, I was a little confused because after listening to Mitt Romney, it was a little, I'm not sure that he was on point with everything that he was saying. So we decided to talk with Tim Miller. He's the Deputy Director of Communications for the RNC. He repeated the oft-heard Republican meme that they would like to repeal and replace Obamacare, but when I asked for some more specifics, those were a little harder to get. Take a look. Tim, every major news organization calling today's ruling a major win for the White House and for President Obama. Are they wrong, and if so, why?
Absolutely they're wrong, Andrew, and all you have to do is look at what happened in 2010 for a political lesson as to how Obamacare goes over with the American public. You know, what the court ruled today was on the constitutionality of Obamacare. What they did not do was rule on whether it's good law or good policy. And on that, the American people have already spoken. Overwhelmingly, they oppose Obamacare. They sent that message in 2010 by voting out Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic House. And they're going to do the same this year in 2012. And the only way we're going to be able to get rid of Obamacare now is by getting rid of President Obama in November.
You know, Tim, I'm a little confused because both you and Mitt Romney, your presumptive nominee, called it bad policy and bad law. Policy, I understand the debate, but calling it a bad law, isn't that putting the RNC at odds with the Supreme Court? I mean, bad law means not constitutional.
No, actually, you're parsing language. What I mean there is that it was a bad law to pass. You know, the Supreme Court made their decision. It's a decision, obviously, we disagree with. But, you know, this isn't really a question about the court. You know, we respect the court and their decision. What we disagree with is the law that was passed by President Obama and the liberal Democratic House under Nancy Pelosi. It's a law that puts onerous burdens on small businesses. It's a law that's stifled job creation at a time when we need jobs. We need middle-class jobs.
Well, Tim, the facts and the impact of the facts and the impact of the law are still up for debate, and I can pull out just as many facts as you can that say one thing or say another. The RNC and every Republican within earshot of a camera for the last 2.5 years has been calling the health care reform plan unconstitutional. Do you still think it's unconstitutional today?
Well, look, it was ruled 5-4. It was a very close ruling, but the Supreme Court was clear. And so this is the reality that we live in now. The only way to get rid of Obamacare is going to be to elect Mitt Romney in November. And because the first thing that he's going to do when he gets into office is repeal Obamacare and start putting in place common sense health care reforms. That's
what we've been hearing again ever since the Reform Care Law first passed, and that we'll have something ready to replace it with. What's ready to go? What's ready to replace it with? I haven't seen any legislative language about anything replacing Obamacare. All I see is repeal.
Well, look, Obamacare right now is still law. The first step is that we've got to repeal it. You know, what we're not going to do is make the same mistake that the Democrats did, which was pass a 2,700 or however many page piece of legislation in the middle of the night.
Understood, Tim, but the Republican Party's had 2+ years to come up with an alternative. There's another vote scheduled for July 11th in the House to repeal Obamacare. What's the replacement?
Well, we've had 2.5 years to try to repeal Obamacare, and we did a really good first step at that in 2010 by electing Republicans all across the country and electing a Republican speaker in John Boehner. And that's why they're going to make that vote on July 11th. And then, you know, once we have a Republican president in November, on day one, what he's going to do is repeal Obamacare, get rid of those regulations, and then we can look at a step-by-step, sensible, common sense
You don't have those step-by-step? You don't have that sensible replacement already ready after 2.5 years?
Well, look, what you're asking for is is another enormous health care package. I mean, obviously, as you know, health care is extremely complicated. There are a lot of things that we can do, you know, as far as sensible, market-based, free market health care reforms that isn't going to, you know, put an onerous government mandate on the people, that isn't going to increase the debt by $500 billion or more dollars.
And did a little research, guys, after this interview just to make sure. No specifics have come out on what the Republicans in the House want to replace with. Jessica, you might be closer. Because, well, I mean, even the RNC didn't have an answer for us right there. We know about the repeal. Replace with what? The cross state lines thing?
The Republicans have been, yes, and that's a significant piece of this. If the, Congress was committed and the president was committed to really reforming the healthcare system, they left a lot of things off the table that would have helped. Interstate competition, tort reform was a major factor that they didn't even address. It was 2,700 pages that they admittedly did not read of this bill. And there's major flaws with it.
And how does that get 30 million people insured?
If you're going to do a comprehensive reform of the healthcare system, you can't leave out key parts like tort reform.
What does tort reform have to do with it? I mean, tort reform has been bandied about for decades and it's stalled. Why should healthcare be held up because of tort reform? Tort reform has a completely different lobby.
Obamacare does not fix the problem. You're talking about the most.
Nor would tort reform.
It would certainly contribute to it, and you're talking about the largest tax increase in American history.
There's a point which is, I think the president's got a decision to make now, Dominic. Is all right. I won today. Nobody likes a guy who's going to gloat, but maybe for once I can explain what's actually in this thing, because I did such a crummy job for the first 2 years that this thing passed. And I would advise, he even acknowledged today, this thing's not perfect. There could be some changes. if he approached Republicans about some consensus on some of the changes,
that's a complete waste of time.
But my only point is,
it's not going to happen. It's too late.
Never would have happened.
If the president, if it's storming and the president says,
by the way, next time just throw stuff at me. Here I was trying to say, here can be some conciliatory thing.
If the president says it's a storm outside and we can prove it's raining, Republicans will say it's a sunny day.
Though there is an opportunity to educate the public about what's in this and change public opinion on the health care law as it is, I think there's a chance to spike the popularity of the health care law.
When we come back, I want to talk about what Mitt Romney ought to do here. We know about, and in fact, we even have one of the justices today saying, hey, this started in Massachusetts. In fact, that's where this began. How does he turn this into a campaign issue? He was pretty strong today on it in terms of strident.